I want you to picture a room, let's say late 17th century. Crowded, the ceiling's probably pretty low, and everyone is, about the average height for the time. Maybe 5'5", 5'6".
Right. Not exactly a spacious place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then this man walks through the door. And he has to physically duck his head to avoid hitting the door frame because he stands 6 feet 7 inches tall.
In the 1600s, that's not just tall. That's mythical. It's like a giant has just walked in among ordinary people.
And it's not just the height, is it? It's the energy. The sources say he's always twitching, his face has this nervous tick, his arms are swinging, and he's moving so fast that his entourage literally has to jog to keep up with him.
That's him. That's Peter the First, the man we now call Peter the Great.
And today, we are doing a deep dive into the life of the man who basically grabbed Russia by the scruff of its neck and dragged it, kicking, screaming, and often bleeding into the modern world.
It is a massive topic, a massive life. We're pulling from so many sources here. Robert K. Massey's definitive biography, of course, but also military histories, articles, even personal accounts from people who knew him.
And we're terrified of him by the sounds of it.
Well, yes, often terrified. And the mission for us today is, I think, to try and reconcile this fundamental paradox.
Right, because when you read about him, you get two completely different men. On one hand, you have this enlightened, forward-thinking modernizer. He's building science academies. He's updating the alphabet. He's fascinated by shipbuilding.
And then you turn the page, and he's a barbarian. He's personally chopping off heads in Red Square. He is torturing his own son to death.
It doesn't compute. How can you be both? The architect of a new civilization and, a medieval tyrant.
That is the central question. And I think to even begin to understand it, you have to go right back to the beginning. Because Peter wasn't born into some stable, happy monarchy. He was born into a snake pit.
Okay, so let's set that scene. It's June 9th, 1672. Peter is born. But he's not the heir apparent, is he? He's more like the backup.
Exactly. He is the spare in every sense of the word. His father, Tsar Alexis, had been married before to a woman from the powerful Miloslavsky family.
And from that first marriage, there were already sons.
2 older half-brothers, Fyodor and Ivan. Peter is the first son of the second wife, Natalia Narishkina. So from the moment he takes his first breath, Peter represents a political faction.
A threat.
A huge threat. You have these 2 rival clans, the Miloslavskis from the first marriage and the Narishkins from the second, and they absolutely despise each other. They're just waiting for the old Tsar to die so they can fight for control.
It sounds less like a royal family and more like, gang warfare.
That is a very, very apt comparison. So Tsar Alexis dies, the eldest son, Fyodor, takes the throne. But Fyodor is incredibly sickly, and he dies young without an heir.
And that creates a power vacuum.
An explosive one. And in 1682, it blows up.
Yeah.
This is the Streltsy Rebellion.
This seems to be the event, the one that defines him. He was only 10 years old. What did he actually see?
Well, first, you need to understand who the Streltsy were. Think of them as the elite musketeers of Moscow, kind of like a Praetorian Guard.
So the Tsar's personal protectors.
Supposedly. But they were also very traditional, very resistant to change, and very easily manipulated. And Peter's ambitious half-sister, Sofia Miloslavsky, saw her chance. She spread a rumor.
What was the rumor?
That the Narishkins, Peter's family, had murdered the other brother, Ivan, to seize the throne. It was a complete lie, but the Streltsy bought it. They stormed the Kremlin in a rage.
So you have a 10-year-old boy inside the palace, and suddenly an armed, angry mob just breaks in.
It was so much worse than a break-in. It was a slaughter. Peter stood on the red staircase of the Kremlin holding his mother's hand. He watched as the Streltsy dragged his family's closest allies, his own uncles, out of the palace right in front of him.
Oh my God.
And they didn't just kill them. They threw them off the porch onto the upturned pikes of the soldiers waiting below. They hacked them to pieces while a 10-year-old child was forced to watch.
I can't even process that. To watch your family be butchered by the very soldiers who are sworn to protect you, that has to do something to a child's mind.
It didn't break him, but it absolutely rewired him. Most historians agree this is the source of his lifelong nervous skolnick, that facial convulsion he had whenever he was stressed or angry.
I'm surprised that wasn't more than that.
Well, psychologically it was. It created in him this deep, visceral hatred, a hatred of the Kremlin, a hatred of Moscow, and a hatred of the traditional boyars, the old nobility. He forever associated the old Russia with blood, chaos, and betrayal.
And the lesson he learned was what?
That power, raw and absolute power, is the only thing that keeps you and your family alive.
So after all that horror, the families have to find a way forward. They can't just kill Peter, but they can't let his family rule.
So they come up with this truly bizarre compromise. The dual tsardom. Ivan V, Peter's half-brother, the one who was mentally and physically disabled, is crowned senior tsar.
And Peter
is made the junior tsar. And pulling the strings behind them both is their sister, Sophia, who installs herself as regent. She's the one really in charge.
And there's that famous throne, right? The one that perfectly captures this whole arrangement.
It's chilling to see. It's in the Kremlin Armory today. It's this massive, ornate, silver, double-seated throne for two little boys. But if you go around to the back of it, there's a hole cut into the velvet fabric.
A listening port. A spy hole.
Precisely. Sophia would literally crouch behind the throne during diplomatic functions, whispering instructions through the hole. Stand up now, say this, sit down.
They were puppets.
In the most literal sense imaginable, Peter was a prop in his own court.
But Sophia made a critical mistake. She thought she could just sideline him. Send him away from court out to the suburbs and he just, grow up to be a harmless country noble?
She exiled him to a country estate called Preobrazhenskoye. And it was the best thing that could have possibly happened to him.
How so?
Because if he'd stayed in the Kremlin, he would have been suffocated. The endless religious ceremonies, the heavy robes, the church rituals, it would have crushed his spirit. But out in the country, he was free. He was wild. And this is where the war games began.
Now, when I hear war games with a kid, I'm thinking of, toy soldiers or capture the flag. Peter wasn't playing tag, was he?
Not even close. He started recruiting local boys, stable hands, sons of servants, anyone he could find. He formed them into what he called his toy regiments.
But they weren't using toys.
No. He petitioned the state armory for real equipment, real muskets, real gunpowder, even real cannons. They built these incredibly elaborate earthwork fortresses and staged full-scale mock battle.
Wait, with the real cannons, did people get hurt?
People died. In these games, there were accounts of soldiers being killed or maimed by explosions, and Peter wasn't watching from a hill. He was right in the middle of it. He enlisted himself at the lowest rank as a drummer boy.
So the Tsar is a drummer boy in his own army.
He believed that before you can command, you must first learn to obey. He stood guard duty in the rain. He dug trenches. He took orders from commoners who outranked him in his own game.
That is such a huge psychological break from how a Tsar is supposed to behave. A Tsar is supposed to be, God's chosen representative on earth, not some guy digging a ditch.
It was revolutionary. And these toy regiments grew up with him. They weren't just playmates, they were forged in fire together. They became the Preobrazhensky and Semenovsky Guards, the most loyal, most elite, most deadly military units in all of Russian history. They were the iron fist he would use to reshape the country.
So that's one major influence, his personal army. But there was another place near his estate that was just as important, right? The German quarter.
The Nemetskaya Sloboda.
Which means what, exactly?
Well, Nemets in Old Russian comes from the word for mute or dumb, as in someone who can't speak our language.
Yeah.
It was the foreigners' ghetto. It was where all the outsiders lived. The Scots, the Dutch, the English, the Germans.
And for a boy raised in the strict insular world of the Moscow court, this place must have seemed like another planet.
It was. Think about it. In Moscow, men wore these heavy, floor-length robes, they had long beards, and women were kept hidden away in seclusion.
The Kurma.
Exactly. Then Peter walks into the German quarter, and men are wearing short coats. They're openly smoking tobacco pipes. They're drinking beer in taverns and talking about geometry, astronomy, and most importantly, shipbuilding. Peter was absolutely intoxicated by it.
And not just by the beer, I assume.
Though he certainly loved that too.
Yeah.
No, he was intoxicated by the competence. These people knew how to do things. They knew how to build things that worked.
And it's here he finds this old boat, right? The one that changes everything.
He finds a derelict English sailboat rotting in a shed. And it's different from the Russian river barges he knew. He asks his tutor, "Why is this boat different?" And the man tells him, "This boat can sail against the wind."
And that idea, sailing against the wind, that just becomes the metaphor for his entire life, doesn't it?
It really does, but here's the tragic irony. He falls completely in love with the idea of sailing, of the sea. And he's the ruler of a country that is, for all intents and purposes, landlocked.
They had no real access to the ocean.
Their only port was Archangel, way up in the north, frozen solid for half the year. The Baltic Sea was completely controlled by Sweden. The Black Sea was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So you have a man obsessed with building a navy who rules a country with no coastline. That frustration, that geographic prison, it drives everything that comes next.
So let's jump forward a bit. It's 1689. Peter is now 17. He's not a kid anymore. He's this huge, energetic young man. He has his own private army. And Sophia, his sister, the regent, finally realizes he's a serious threat.
She tries to make a move against him to consolidate her power. But Peter is faster, and his guard regiments are loyal only to him. He overthrows her.
And what happens to Sophia?
He sends her to a convent. That became his go-to solution for troublesome female relatives. A few years later, in 1696, his co-tsar Ivan dies. And now, for the first time, Peter is the sole, absolute autocrat of Russia.
And one of the first things he does is completely shocking. He organizes this massive diplomatic mission to Western Europe, the Grand Embassy.
The stated diplomatic goal was, to build an alliance against the Ottoman Turks.
But that wasn't his real reason, was it?
Not at all. Peter's personal goal was technology. He wanted to go and see for himself how the West worked. But here's the absurd part. He decided he would travel incognito.
As Sergeant Peter Mikhailov.
Yes. Just trying to picture this. A 6'7" giant with a traveling party of 250 nobles, dwarfs, jesters, and servants, all trying to pretend he's just some ordinary soldier named Peter.
Did anybody actually fall for the disguise?
Absolutely not. It was the worst kept secret in Europe. Every king, every diplomat knew exactly who he was, but they had to play along with the theater of it all.
So they'd have meetings where they'd have to pretend this giant in the room wasn't the Tsar of Russia.
Precisely. King William III of England met him and had to address him as Sergeant. It led to these incredibly awkward situations where Peter would refuse to sit in the seat of honor at a banquet because, as he'd insist, a sergeant wouldn't sit there.
But he wasn't just there for the diplomatic games. He was there to work. He actually got his hands dirty.
Incredibly dirty. In Holland, he went straight to the shipyards of the Dutch East India Company. He enrolled as a ship's carpenter, he bought his own tools, he carried timber, he hammered nails, he learned how to bend planks and caulk seams.
And he made his nobles do it.
Oh, yes. He forced these pampered Russian aristocrats who had never done a day of manual labor in their lives to climb the rigging and learn the sails. He wanted to understand the mechanics of a ship from the keel up, and he was going to force Russia to learn with him.
I read that his curiosity was just boundless. It wasn't just ships.
Everything. Anatomy, engraving, coin minting, you name it. He visited the famous anatomist Frederick Ruysch in Amsterdam. He was so fascinated by the preserved specimens that he apparently kissed the forehead of a preserved child cadaver. It was this intense, almost morbid curiosity.
And the dentistry. We haven't talked about the dentistry.
Yes. He bought a set of dental instruments, and he decided he was now a dentist.
Oh, no.
So if anyone in his entourage, any courtier, complained of a toothache, Peter would get very excited. He'd have them sit down, and he would personally pull the tooth himself.
Was he any good at it?
He was terrible at it. He kept a bag of the teeth he'd pulled as trophies, and many of them still had large chunks of jawbone attached.
That is a legitimate nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
You have a toothache, but you can't say a word because the Tsar of all Russia will come at you with a pair of pliers.
It tells you so much about his personality, this belief that he could master any trade, any skill, just through sheer force of will.
He also spent time in England. And this is where we get the story of Sigh's court. Because this anecdote really shatters any image of him as some sort of, refined, enlightened monarch.
Right. So the English government needed a place for him to stay. They rented him this beautiful country estate called Sigh's Court. It belonged to a famous intellectual and diarist named John Evelyn.
And Evelyn was a famous gardener.
He was incredibly proud of his gardens. He had these pristine, perfectly manicured holly hedges. Peter and his entourage moved in for a few months.
And they completely trashed the place.
Trashed is putting it mildly. We have the official bill of damages that the English Treasury had to pay Evelyn. They broke over 300 windows. They used the family portraits for pistol practice. They tore up the floors, the feather beds, everything.
And the famous hedges.
The hedges. Apparently, Peter discovered the wheelbarrow. He'd never seen one before. He and his friends thought it was the most hilarious invention. So they would get drunk, put one person in the wheelbarrow, and then ram it at full speed through John Evelyn's prized holly hedges, just for fun.
So on one hand, he's meeting with scientists at the Royal Observatory, and on the other, he's acting like a college frat boy on a rampage.
That's the paradox of Peter in a nutshell. But this whole grand tour, this incredible learning experience, gets cut short.
The Streltsy again.
The Streltsy again. In 1698, word reaches him that the musketeers have revolted back in Moscow. They want to overthrow his government and put his sister Sophia back on the throne.
So Peter has to rush home, and this time, he's not the 10-year-old boy on the staircase.
No, this time he is an avenging angel. By the time he actually gets back to Moscow, the rebellion has already been put down by his loyal commanders. But for Peter, that wasn't enough. He wanted to make an example. He wanted to eradicate the Streltsy from Russian history.
So he starts his own investigation.
An investigation that involved torture on an industrial scale, and then came the executions. This wasn't a quick firing squad. This was medieval theater designed to inspire terror.
How many were killed?
Over 1,000 men. Many were broken on the wheel. Others were hanged outside the walls of the convent where Sophia was imprisoned. And Peter didn't just watch.
He participated.
He took an axe and personally beheaded several of the rebel leaders. Then he forced his top nobles, his generals and ministers, to take up axes and do the same. He made them all complicit in the bloodletting. He left the bodies to rot in Red Square all winter as a warning.
What a homecoming. He returns from the enlightened West and immediately plunges the capital into a bloodbath.
And then, almost the very next day, he starts his modernizing reforms. And he starts with facial hair.
The famous shaving of the beards. It sounds almost money to us, but this was a huge deal, wasn't it?
It was a profound attack on their identity. You have to understand the context of Russian Orthodoxy at the time. The beard was sacred. The belief was that man is made in the image of God. God has a beard. Therefore, to shave your beard was a sin. It was a rejection of God's image.
So when Peter pulls out a razor, he's not just talking about fashion. He's attacking their very souls.
He held a grand reception for his nobles to welcome him home. They all knelt to kiss his hand, and he literally pulled out a long, straight razor and started hacking off their beards right there in the hall.
There must have been panic.
Total panic. But what could they do? He was the czar, and for those he didn't shave personally, he introduced the beard tax.
Right. You could pay to keep your beard.
Yes, but it was expensive. And if you paid the tax, you were forced to wear a copper token around your neck like a license. On one side, it had a picture of a beard and mustache. On the other side, it was engraved with the words, "The beard is a useless burden."
He was actively mocking them.
He was forcing them visually to break with the medieval past. And it didn't stop with beards. He also banned their traditional long robes, the kaftans.
Because they were impractical.
Exactly. You couldn't work, you couldn't fight in them. He mandated short, Western-style coats. He even posted guards at the city gates with scissors. If you tried to enter Moscow wearing a long robe, they would force you to your knees and cut it off right at the knee line.
He is literally a fashion policeman. But the changes went even deeper. He changed time itself.
He did. Russia was still using the old Byzantine calendar, which counted the years from the supposed creation of the world. So while Europe was in the year 1699, Russia was in the year 7208.
That's confusing.
And their new year started in September. Peter just said no more. He decreed that Russia would adopt the Julian calendar, like the West. The year would be 1700, and New Year's would be on January 1st. He forced people to decorate their homes with pine branches and celebrate in the European style.
Just imagine the psychological shock of all that. In a few months, your beard's gone, your clothes are chopped in half, the year has changed by over 5,000 years, and you're celebrating New Year's in the middle of winter.
It was shock therapy for an entire nation. And then he overhauled the entire social structure with the Table of Ranks in 1722.
This is a huge deal for how Russia was run for the next 200 years.
Absolutely. Before Peter, your status, your power, it all depended on your birth, who your father was. It was a closed aristocracy of boyar families. Peter hated that system. He valued competence and service above all.
So the Table of Ranks was a meritocracy.
In theory, yes. He created 3 parallel ladders: military, civil service, and the court. Each ladder had 14 ranks. Everyone, prince or commoner, had to start at the bottom at rank 14.
And you moved up by serving the state well.
Exactly. And here was the revolutionary part. If you reached the 8th rank in any of the ladders, you were automatically granted hereditary nobility.
So a commoner could become a noble.
A commoner could become a noble, their children would be nobles. This infuriated the old families, but it created a vast new class of administrators and officers whose loyalty was not to their ancient clan, but directly to the Tsar who had given them their status.
So he's remade the culture, the calendar, the government. But he still has that one massive overriding problem we talked about earlier. He's building a navy, but he doesn't have an ocean.
Which leads directly to the defining conflict of his reign. The Great Northern War. It lasted for 21 years. It was Peter's obsession.
And the enemy was Sweden.
Yes, and at this time, Sweden was not some quiet, neutral country. The Swedish Empire was a major European superpower. They had the most professional, best-trained army in Europe.
And they were led by a military genius.
The Lion of the North, King Charles XII. He was just a teenager when the war started, only 18, and Peter and his allies thought he'd be an easy target.
They were very, very wrong.
Disastrously wrong. In 1700, at the Battle of Narva, the brand new Russian army tried to besiege a Swedish fortress. They outnumbered the Swedes almost 4-1.
And they got crushed.
It was a total humiliation. A blizzard blew directly into the Russians' faces. Charles led a brilliant, daring charge, and the Russian army just collapsed. They ran. The Swedes captured all their artillery, their treasury, everything. All of Europe laughed at Peter. They said the Russian bear had been declawed.
Most rulers would have sued for peace right then. Give it up.
But Peter didn't. This is where you really see his greatness. He saw the defeat not as an end, but as a lesson. He famously said, "The Swedes will beat us for a long time, but eventually they will teach us how to beat them."
So what did he do?
He went home, and in an act that horrified the church, he ordered the church bells to be melted down to make new cannons. He completely reorganized the army, drilling them in modern European tactics. And he waited.
Because Charles XII got distracted, right?
Yes, Charles got bogged down in a long war in Poland, ignoring Russia. And while the cat was away, Peter, the mouse, crept back to the Baltic coast, to the marshy, desolate mouth of the Neva River.
A place that was basically a swamp.
A total swamp. The locals said it was a place where only wolves and crows lived. It flooded constantly. It was freezing. But it was on the sea. And in 1703, Peter pointed to a muddy island and said, "Here there shall be a town."
The founding of St. Petersburg.
The building of this city is one of the most brutal and epic stories in human history. There was no local stone. Every single rock for the foundations had to be brought in from somewhere else. Peter even issued a tax that every ship, every cart that came to the city had to bring a certain number of stones with it.
And the labor. Who built it?
Conscripted peasants and Swedish prisoners of war, tens of thousands of them. They worked in waist-deep, freezing mud. They didn't have proper tools. Many dug the earth with their bare hands and carried it away in their shirts.
The death toll must have been astronomical.
It was. We don't have exact numbers, but estimates range from 30,000 to over 100,000 people dead. From disease, from accidents, from malnutrition. It's often called the city built on bones. And it's literally true.
But he did it. He willed a European stone city, modeled on Amsterdam and Venice, to rise out of a desolate swamp.
He despised Moscow, with all its traditions and bloody memories. He called St. Petersburg his paradise. In 1712, he officially moved the capital there. It was a definitive statement. Russia's future lies to the west. We are a maritime power now.
But the war still wasn't over. Charles XII eventually decided to deal with Peter once and for all. He invades Russia, and this sets up the Great Showdown.
The Battle of Poltava, 1709. Charles marched his famously invincible army deep into Russia, and Peter used the strategy that would later defeat Napoleon, and later still, Hitler.
He retreated.
He burned the crops. He destroyed the bridges. He let General Winter do the heavy lifting. By the time the Swedish army reached the town of Poltava, deep in Ukraine, they were starving, freezing, and exhausted.
And then Peter turned and fought.
The Battle of Poltava was a stunning reversal of Narva. The new, modernized Russian army that Peter had spent a decade building just annihilated the Swedes. Charles XII himself was wounded and had to flee in disguise to the Ottoman Empire.
And the consequences of that one battle were huge.
They were world-changing. In a single day, the Swedish Empire ceased to be a great power, and the Russian Empire was born. Peter had secured his window to the west.
And after the final peace treaty in 1721, that's when he's officially named emperor.
Yes. The Senate bestows on him the titles the Great, Father of the Fatherland, and Emperor of all the Russias. He was no longer just a czar, he was an emperor on par with the Habsburgs.
So, On the world stage, he's a colossus. He has achieved everything he set out to do. But we have to turn to his personal life. Because while he was building this glorious state, his own family was completely disintegrating.
It's a genuine tragedy, a story worthy of Shakespeare, and it centers on his son and heir, Alexei.
Alexei was the son from his first marriage, right?
Yes, to Eudoxia Lopukina. And you have to remember, Peter hated Eudoxia. She represented everything about traditional, pious old Moscow that he was trying to destroy. He'd forced her into a convent years earlier.
So Alexei grows up, essentially without a mother, and with this terrifying, larger-than-life and mostly absent father.
And Alexei was his father's opposite in every conceivable way. Peter was loud, energetic, violent, and loved war and machines. Alexei was quiet, intellectual, deeply religious, and he hated the military life.
Peter must have looked at his son and seen weakness.
He saw everything he despised. He saw the past. He feared that as soon as he died, Alexei would undo everything. Let the boyars grow their beards back, move the capital back to Moscow, and let the precious navy rot in its harbor.
And he tried to force Alexei to change.
He bullied him relentlessly. We have the letters he wrote. He told Alexei, correct yourself, make yourself useful to the state, or I will cut you off from the succession like a gangrenous limb.
That's brutal.
Alexei was so terrified of his father that in 1716 he did something completely unthinkable. He ran away.
The heir to the Russian throne just fled the country.
He disguised himself and fled to Vienna, seeking political asylum from the Holy Roman Emperor. It created a massive international scandal. The Tsarevich of Russia, a fugitive.
How did Peter get him back?
He sent his most cunning and ruthless secret agent, Count Tolstoy, an ancestor of the great writer, to track him down. They found him hiding in a castle in Naples, and Tolstoy lied to him.
He promised him safety.
He swore on the Bible. He promised that if Alexei would just return to Russia, Peter would forgive him completely. He could give up the throne and live a quiet life in the country with his mistress.
And Alexei believed him.
He was desperate. He believed him. He returned to Moscow. And the moment he arrived, the trap snapped shut.
Peter went back on his word.
Immediately. He stripped Alexei of his right to the throne. But that wasn't enough. Peter was consumed by paranoia. He was convinced Alexei had been part of a wider plot, a coup. He set up a special investigative commission.
And this leads to the torture chamber.
It's one of the darkest moments in the Romanov dynasty. They arrested everyone Alexei had ever known, his friends, his confessors, even his mother and her convent. They were all tortured to extract confessions against him. And finally, Peter gave the order to torture his own son.
And the sources say Peter was present.
The records are clear. Peter was present in the torture chamber of the Peter and Paul fortress while his son was being interrogated. Alexei was given 25 lashes with the knout, a heavy leather whip that could tear the flesh from a man's back.
Why? What did he hope to achieve?
He wanted the truth. He wanted names. Alexei, in agony, confessed to anything and everything they wanted to hear. He was tried and sentenced to death for treason. But before the execution could be carried out, Alexei died in his cell.
From the torture.
Almost certainly from shock and his wounds. He was 28 years old.
Peter killed his own son for the good of the state.
That's exactly how he saw it. He didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as the first servant of the state. His duty to the future of Russia, as he saw it, overrode his duty as a father. If his son was a threat to his reforms, his son had to be eliminated. But it had a devastating consequence. It ended the direct male line of the Romanovs.
Which brings us to Peter's own end. By his early 50s, he's lived this incredibly hard life. The constant warfare, the frantic work, the extreme drinking. His body is breaking down.
He had severe urinary tract and bladder problems. He was in constant agonizing pain. But he refused to stop working. And there's a story about his final illness, a legend really, that even if it's not 100% true, it fits his character perfectly.
The legend of Lokta.
Yes. In November 1724, he's sailing on the Gulf of Finland. He sees a boat full of soldiers that's run aground in a storm. The men are in the water, drowning.
A normal emperor would send his guards to help. What does Peter do?
Peter jumps into the water himself. He wades into the waist-deep, freezing Baltic Sea to help drag the boat and the men to safety. He saves them. But the exposure to the icy water makes his illness catastrophically worse.
So he basically dies as he lived, directly, physically intervening, and ignoring any thought for his own safety.
Precisely. He spent the next few months dying in excruciating pain. And this leads to the final great mystery of his life. Peter had passed a law a few years earlier, breaking with tradition, that said the reigning monarch could choose their own successor.
But he never got around to actually naming her.
He procrastinated. So now it's February 1725. He's on his deathbed. He knows the end is near. He asks for a pen and paper
To name his heir.
His hand is shaking terribly. He manages to scrawl just 2 words, "Leave all to." And then the pen drops from his hand. He loses consciousness and dies shortly after. He never finished the sentence.
Leave all to. That is the ultimate historical cliffhanger.
It threw Russia into a century of succession crises. In the short term, his second wife, Catherine, the former peasant laundry girl, he had made an empress-seized power with the help of Peter's new guard regiments. But the question of succession haunted the dynasty for generations.
So we step back and look at this whole incredible, terrifying life. The man who shaved the beards, who built the city on bones, who won the war, who killed his son. I have to ask the question, was he a hero or a monster?
And the answer for Russia has to be, he was both. You simply cannot separate the two. He was a civilizing force and a barbaric one. He took a country that was, by European standards, medieval, isolated, and irrelevant, and in a single generation, he turned it into a major European power, an empire.
He gave them a modern army, a navy, science, a new capital.
But the cost was staggering. He didn't abolish serfdom, he entrenched it, making it even worse to fuel his projects. He created a powerful police state. And he created this massive cultural split in Russia between a westernized French-speaking elite and the vast mass of traditional Orthodox peasantry. A split that never healed and arguably led directly to the revolution of 1917.
There's that famous statue of him in St. Petersburg, the Bronze Horseman.
It's the perfect monument to him. It shows Peter on a rearing horse, balanced on the edge of a cliff, with his horse trampling a snake, symbolizing treason in the old ways. It's dynamic, it's violent, and it's precarious. That was Peter. He dragged Russia to the edge of a cliff and forced it to leap into the future.
And we're still, in many ways, living in the world that he created. Well, that is the life of Peter the Great, a man who was, in every single sense, too big for his time.
A terrifying, brilliant, and absolutely transformative figure, a true giant of history.
If you enjoyed this journey through the chaos and the glory of the Russian Empire, and you want to understand more about these monumental figures who literally built the world we live in, well, you're in the right place.
And we really need your help to keep these deep dives coming. If this story grabbed you, please consider supporting the History Titans channel. The easiest way to do that is just to hit the like button, subscribe, and maybe share this audio with a friend who thinks their family reunions get a little dramatic.
It honestly makes a huge difference. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next era.